They call it paradise. A land of sunlight, spices, and sacred traditions. But beneath the beauty lies something darker. This is Crimson Archipelago, uncovering the darkest crimes from the islands of the East. Ryan Jombang, Indonesia's most chilling serial killer, didn't just kill. He posed for cameras. He confessed everything. And then he wrote a book. Was it rage, repression, or something much darker? This is the story of the smiling serial killer, now on Crimson Archipelago. Watch the full episode and uncover the monster hiding behind a smile. Chapter 1: The Smile That Lied. His name was Very Idham Henyansyah. But the media would come to call him something else: Ryan Jombang, the name of his hometown in East Java, and the name that would haunt Indonesia after a shocking discovery in 2008. 11 decomposing bodies buried in his mother's backyard. Before all that, he was just Ryan. Born in February 1978 in Jombang, East Java, to a religious Muslim family. He was quiet, obedient, clean-cut. He prayed. He followed the rules. He stayed out of trouble. He was also hiding something. Ryan was gay. In a deeply conservative environment, that truth was dangerous. So he buried it, just like he would later bury his victims. In his early 20s, Ryan moved to Jakarta. There, he began building a different identity. A certified fitness trainer, a bodybuilder, and part-time model. He was well known at his gym. Confident, muscular, and polite. He often posed shirtless for the camera. His social media showed a man obsessed with health, appearance, and strength. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He called his mother often. To many, he seemed calm, composed, even charming. But that image would soon unravel. Behind the sculpted muscles and wide smile was a man capable of horrifying violence. Between 2006 and 2008, Ryan murdered 11 people, most of them young men he knew personally. Friends, lovers, acquaintances. He didn't just kill them. He dismembered some of them. He buried their bodies in the garden behind his mother's modest home in Jombang. And he went on living, peacefully, publicly, as if nothing had happened. He was caught not because he confessed, but because he lost his temper again. The first known victim was Harry Santoso, a man Ryan claimed had mocked his mother and tried to extort him. They fought in Ryan's apartment. Ryan grabbed a barbell. He struck Harry repeatedly in the head until he died. Then he dismembered the body, packed the parts in a suitcase, and dumped it by the side of the road in Jakarta. Days later, police found the suitcase. Inside, the mutilated remains of a man. They traced it back to Ryan. When they arrested him, Ryan didn't run. In fact, he confessed. Not just to one murder, but to 10 more. He even took the police to the burial site behind his mother's house. As the stench of decay filled the air, officers unearthed body after body. Neighbors wept. Reporters swarmed. The quiet boy from Jombang had become Indonesia's most infamous serial killer. And in court, Ryan shocked the nation again. He smiled, waved at cameras, and sang romantic songs for the judge. He became known as the smiling serial killer. But before we get to the trial, the courtroom, the songs, we need to go back to where it all began. To the night Harry Santoso died. The first murder. The trigger. The beginning of a killing spree that would stain a mother's backyard with blood. Chapter 2: The Man in the Suitcase. It started with a noise. Early morning, Jakarta, July 2008. A garbage collector was doing his rounds in the streets of Kebagusan, Pasar Minggu. A quiet area. Mostly residential. Nothing out of the ordinary, until he noticed an abandoned suitcase by the side of the road. It was large, heavy, slightly open, and the smell overpowering. Inside were body parts, dismembered, wrapped in plastic. The head, missing. A tattoo on one arm. A few strands of hair. Blood had already soaked through the lining. The police were called immediately. News spread like wildfire. A suitcase containing a corpse. It wasn't the first time Jakarta had seen a murder, but this was different. Methodical. Cold. Brutal. At the morgue, investigators began working backward. They had no ID, no wallet, no face. But they had fingerprints, a tattoo, and a few phone records pulled from a nearby SIM card that hadn't been completely destroyed. Eventually, they identified the victim as Heri Santoso, a 40-year-old man. He had been seen recently with a younger man, muscular, well-dressed, and very polite. His name? Very Idham Henyansyah. Or as he introduced himself to most people, Ryan. Police brought him in for questioning. Not as a suspect, at first, but as a possible witness. Ryan didn't hesitate. He answered everything calmly, without shaking. He said yes, he knew Heri. Yes, Heri had come to his apartment. Yes, they had argued. But then, something shifted. Ryan's tone changed. He leaned in and said, "If I tell you everything, are you ready to listen?" What followed was a confession so cold, so casual, it stunned the officers in the room. Ryan admitted he had killed Heri during a fight. He claimed Heri tried to blackmail him, threatening to expose their relationship. Worse, he said Heri insulted his mother, calling her names Ryan refused to repeat. That, he said, was the final straw. Ryan claimed he lost control. He struck Heri repeatedly with a barbell. He waited until Heri stopped breathing. Then he took a knife and began cutting. Piece by piece. He packed the remains into a suitcase. Then, in the dark hours before dawn, he dragged the suitcase into his car, and left it by the roadside. He went home, cleaned the floor, took a shower, and made breakfast for his mother. The police were stunned, but it didn't stop there. When asked if he'd done this before, Ryan smiled and said, "That was just the first body. You might want to check my mother's backyard." Chapter 3, 11 Graves in the Garden. The house looked normal. A modest home in Jombang, East Java. Simple brick walls, faded paint, a small yard out back. The kind of place where neighbors say hello, where children ride bicycles past the front gate. No one imagined it was hiding a mass grave. But Ryan had told them to look there. And so, with shovels, gloves, and a rising sense of dread, police officers began to dig. They didn't have to go far. Just a few inches beneath the soil, the earth gave up its first secret, a leg bone, partially wrapped in cloth. Then came a skull. Then another. By the end of the day, 11 bodies had been uncovered. Each one buried at different depths. Each in various states of decay. Some fully skeletonized. Others still bearing flesh. It wasn't random. Ryan had mapped them in his head. He pointed out where each victim lay, calmly, as if giving a garden tour. Neighbors wept behind fences. Reporters screamed questions from the street. Ryan. He just smiled. Who were these people? Many were young men. Some were ex-lovers. Others were friends who had stayed the night. A few were simply people Ryan suspected of betrayal, lying, cheating, or threatening to expose his sexuality. In Ryan's own words, They were evil. They were going to ruin me. God understands what I did. He spoke about sin and punishment, about how he was doing justice. He claimed to be guided by visions, sometimes by divine instinct. But the truth was simpler and darker. Each murder followed a pattern. An invitation. Often to his apartment in Jakarta. A confrontation. Sometimes about money. Often about sex. An explosion of rage. Usually triggered by an insult, real or imagined. A weapon. A barbell. A knife. Whatever was nearby. The cleanup. Dismemberment, if needed. And burial, always, eventually, in that backyard. One of the victims was only 20. Another was a fellow gym trainer. One, Ryan claimed, was a man who had tried to seduce him, and laughed when Ryan refused. Whether all of it was true is still unclear. What's clear is this: Ryan killed 11 people. And he kept their secrets beneath his mother's garden for nearly 2 years. His mother, by the way, said she had no idea. She thought the smell was just dead rats. She never asked why the yard kept getting dug up. She said her son was kind, religious, a good man. And in some ways, he was. He prayed. He helped neighbors carry groceries. He wore clean clothes, answered politely, smiled often. But in the silence of his own thoughts, he was burying the truth. After the discovery, Ryan was formally charged. He confessed on television. He reenacted his crimes for police. And in a move that left many disturbed, Ryan even sang romantic pop songs, while in custody, softly, sweetly, as if unaware of the gravity of his crimes. But it was his smile that truly haunted the nation. The media dubbed him the smiling serial killer. A man who murdered 11 people. And smiled through every moment of judgment. Chapter 4, The Trial and the Spotlight. Courtrooms are meant to be solemn. Places of justice. Silence. Law. Grief. But the trial of Very Idham Henyansyah felt different. Like a performance. It began in 2008 at the Jombang District Court. Ryan arrived in a crisp white shirt, hair neatly combed, with the same calm, boyish smile that had unsettled the entire country. He waved at reporters. He answered questions. He never looked like a man facing death. From the very first day, the case drew massive attention. This wasn't just about murder. It was about identity, sexuality, religion, masculinity, control. A young, attractive man. A self-proclaimed devout Muslim. A string of male victims. A house full of corpses. Indonesia hadn't seen anything like it. The court laid out the facts in chilling detail. 11 murders. Multiple weapons. Knives, metal bars, dumbbells. Motives rooted in jealousy, rage, and fear of exposure. Bodies buried in the backyard. One dismembered in an apartment, stuffed in a suitcase. Ryan didn't deny it. He confessed. He reenacted the killings for investigators. He smiled through most of it. And then he spoke. Ryan told the court that he had acted in self-defense. He claimed his victims had tried to seduce, exploit, or threaten him. He said he was trying to live as a good Muslim man, but others kept pulling him into sin. That he had been betrayed emotionally, spiritually, sexually. He painted himself as the victim. A misunderstood man pushed too far. The prosecution didn't buy it. Neither did the judges. Still, Ryan became a media phenomenon. Newspapers printed his face next to words, "the sweet-faced killer." Talk shows debated his sexuality. Magazine covers asked whether religion, repression, and trauma had turned him into a monster. Inside the courtroom, the families of the victims wept. Some demanded the death penalty. Others simply wanted the bodies of their loved ones returned. Names matched to remains, dignity restored. On April 6, 2009, the verdict was announced. Ryan was found guilty of multiple counts of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to death by firing squad. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He smiled. In an interview later, Ryan said, "I've made peace with God. Whatever happens now, I accept." But his story didn't end there. From death row, Ryan wrote an autobiography. He gave interviews. He offered advice on morality. He even hinted at wanting to release music. Some saw this as an attempt at redemption. Others called it narcissism. But the effect was undeniable. He stayed in the spotlight. A killer who refused to disappear. Chapter 5, Legacy of Horror. For most killers, the story ends at the trial. Not for Ryan Jombang. After his death sentence in 2009, Ryan was moved to Nusa Kambangan Island, Indonesia's most notorious prison, where the nation's most dangerous criminals wait for execution. But years passed. And Ryan remained alive. His appeals were denied. His clemency request was rejected by the president. Still no gunfire. No final chapter. The delay in his execution stirred public debate. Some called it justice deferred. Others wondered if his continued presence in the prison system served a purpose. Because Ryan wasn't just sitting in a cell. He was writing, talking, performing. He penned an autobiography titled The Untold Story of Ryan, filled with reflections, confessions, and religious devotion. He described himself as repentant, reformed, and ready to face God. But critics weren't convinced. Was it genuine remorse? Or just another performance? Journalists noted how Ryan continued to curate his image, from the smiling killer to the repentant soul, to the tragic figure. He became a symbol of Indonesia's discomfort with queerness, masculinity, and media sensationalism. For some, he was a monster. For others, a mirror. The families of the victims never got closure. Some bodies remained unidentified. Others had to be reburied after exhumation. Their stories were overshadowed by the man who took their lives. In Indonesian pop culture, Ryan's case became legend. Referenced in crime documentaries. Studied in law schools. Whispered about in classrooms and prayer circles. Not because he was the most prolific serial killer, but because of how he blurred the line between murderer and celebrity. Because he reminded the country how evil can look ordinary. Even charming. Even polite. As of today, Ryan Jombang is still on death row. Waiting. Smiling. Haunting. A man who buried bodies in his own backyard. And still managed to plant himself in the memory of a nation. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it sings. And sometimes, it writes memoirs from death row. Very Idham Henyansyah, or Ryan Jombang, wasn't just a murderer. He was a performance. A mirror held up to a society still struggling with identity, shame, and the darkness behind closed doors. His crimes were horrific. But what made him unforgettable was how ordinary he looked while doing the unthinkable. In a country of silence, his case screamed. And now he waits. Behind bars. Sentenced. But still here. You've been listening to Crimson Archipelago, where we uncover the true crimes that haunt the islands of Indonesia. If this story disturbed you, it should. And there are more like it. Like, subscribe, share. And remember, The scariest monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live next door.